There's a bouquet on the floor outside my apartment door right now. Fresh. Still damp at the stems like it was cut this morning. I didn't buy it. I didn't order it. And according to the delivery logs, the doorman's sign-in sheet, and 4 security cameras I paid out of pocket to install, nobody walked up to my door and put it there. This happened every single morning for 90 days. And the flowers weren't roses. They weren't anything you'd send a woman you were trying to impress. They were the exact combination my mother used to buy from the same corner stand in Queens every Sunday for as long as I was alive to watch her do it. White ranunculus, a single stem of purple stalk, baby's breath tied with brown twine, never ribbon. My mother has been dead for 6 years. So when I tell you I stood in that hallway holding those flowers and felt the floor tilt under me, I need you to understand. I wasn't scared of a ghost. I was scared because somewhere out there, someone knew something about my mother that I didn't. And they'd known it the whole time I was grieving her. My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 33. I live in a pre-war building in Astoria, 4th floor, 1 bedroom, the kind of apartment where you can hear your upstairs neighbor's washing machine, but you love it anyway because it's yours. I moved in 2 years ago after my divorce, when I needed somewhere that had nothing to do with anyone I used to be married to. I work in medical billing. It is not a glamorous job. I mention it because it matters later. I am, by nature and by profession, someone who checks things twice. I reconcile numbers for a living. I do not let discrepancies sit. So when something doesn't add up in my personal life, I don't shrug it off. I investigate it the way I'd investigate a claim that got denied for no listed reason. The first bouquet showed up on a Tuesday in April. I almost didn't notice it. I was half asleep, running late, phone in one hand and coffee in the other, and I nearly kicked it down the hall before I looked down and saw what it was. White ranunculus, purple stalk, baby's breath, brown twine. I stood there in my hallway in my work clothes and felt something crack open in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Because that combination isn't something you stumble into. Florists don't casually land on white ranunculus and a single stem of purple stalk tied in brown twine. That was her asterisk arrangement. My mother, Marguerite Brooks, bought that exact bouquet from the same flower stand on Steinway Street for over 20 years. She used to say the ranunculus reminded her of paper flowers, the ones her own mother folded out of tissue when she was a girl in Louisiana. She used to say purple stalk smelled like a memory she couldn't place. She said it every single Sunday, like a little liturgy, while she trimmed the stems over the kitchen sink. I picked up the bouquet, and I checked the building hallway camera situation, because at the time I didn't have my own. There wasn't one covering our floor. The building only had cameras in the lobby and by the mailboxes, so I called the front desk. Hey, this is Elena in 4C. Did anyone come by looking for me this morning? Or drop something off? The doorman, a guy named Rennie who's worked that lobby for as long as I've lived there, said no. Nobody had signed in for me. No deliveries logged. He said it kind of like I was wasting his time, and I let it go because it was one bouquet. One weird morning. I told myself maybe a neighbor left it for someone else, and it ended up at my door by mistake. I told myself a lot of things that week to keep from sitting with the actual, obvious, uncomfortable truth. That bouquet was not a coincidence. I didn't throw the flowers away. I put them in a jar on my kitchen counter, and I looked at them every morning while I made coffee, and every morning they made my chest hurt in that specific way grief has, where it isn't sharp. It's just heavy, like a stone you've learned to carry without noticing until someone points at it. Then Wednesday came, and there was another one. Same combination, same twine, same slight dampness at the stems that told me they'd been cut that morning, not sitting in some delivery truck overnight. By Friday, when the 4th bouquet appeared, I stopped telling myself stories. I stood in the hallway at 6:15 in the morning because I'd started waking up earlier and earlier, some part of me hoping I'd catch whoever it was, and I just stared at the door across from my own and down the hall at the stairwell, and I felt, for the first time in my adult life, truly and completely watched. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I am not a paranoid person. I didn't grow up with a lot of drama. My mother raised me alone after my father left when I was 4, and our life was quiet to the point of being almost sealed off, if I'm honest, looking back. We didn't have extended family visits. We didn't have a big photo album with 100 relatives in it. It was just the two of us, and I never thought to question that, because when you're a kid, whatever your normal is just normal. So the fact that I went from mildly unsettled to installing home security equipment in the span of about 10 days tells you how deeply this got under my skin. I ordered a battery-powered doorbell camera and 2 additional motion sensor cameras, one angled down the hallway toward the stairwell exit, one angled toward the elevator bank. I told myself I was being thorough, the way I'm thorough with a denied insurance claim. Cover every angle. Leave no gap for someone to slip through unaccounted for. I set them up on a Sunday night. I checked the battery levels twice. I made sure the motion sensitivity was high enough to catch even someone moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to trip it. Monday morning, 6:15 a.m., the bouquet was there. I pulled the footage before I even opened my door. Nothing. Not someone moved too fast to see clearly. Not a shadow inconclusive. Nothing. The hallway was empty at 6:00, empty at 6:05, empty at 6:10, and then in the 6:12 to 6:18 window, the exact window during which that bouquet had to have been placed, my hallway camera had a 6-minute stretch of frozen footage, not blacked out, not glitched in an obvious digital corruption way. Frozen. As if someone had taken a single still frame of the empty hallway and looped it for 6 minutes exactly. I am, again, not a technical genius, but I know enough to know that doesn't happen by accident with consumer-grade cameras unless something or someone caused it to happen. I checked the elevator angle camera. Same gap, same 6 minutes, same eerie freeze frame of stillness. I didn't sleep well after that. I want to be honest with you about what that does to a person, not the flowers themselves. But the proof that someone had the capability to interfere with my security system without ever appearing on it, that's not someone left me something sentimental. That's someone with access, someone with intention, someone who had clearly done this before, possibly to other people, possibly in other buildings. I called the building's management company. I explained the situation, probably less calmly than I intended to. The woman on the phone, to her credit, didn't dismiss me. She said she'd pull the building's own hallway camera, the one by the stairwell exit on the 3rd floor, which does cover part of the stairs leading to my floor, and get back to me. She called back 2 days later. Her voice had changed. It had the careful, overpolite tone people use when they're about to tell you something they don't fully understand themselves. Ms. Brooks, I did find something, but I think you should just come look at it yourself. I went down to the management office on my lunch break. The building super, an older man named Dmitri, who'd been there almost as long as the building had existed in its current renovated form, sat with me in front of a small monitor. The footage was grainy, black and white, timestamp 6:09 a.m. A woman walks into frame at the base of the 3rd floor stairwell. She's dressed plainly, a long coat, a scarf pulled up, hair tucked under a hat. She's not trying to hide her face exactly, but she's not making it easy either, the way someone walks when they know a camera is there and they've made peace with being unidentifiable rather than invisible. She's carrying a bouquet. She climbs the stairs. At 6:11, she exits the frame toward the 4th floor. And then at 6:17, she comes back down. Alone, empty-handed, not rushing, not looking over her shoulder, just walking the way you walk when you've done something you've done 100 times before and have no reason to think anyone's watching. Dmitri paused the footage and looked at me. You know her. I didn't. I told him I didn't. But something about the walk, I want to say this carefully, because I know how it sounds. Something about the way she moved was familiar to me in a way I couldn't articulate. Not her face. Her posture. The particular way she favored her left side going downstairs, like an old hip injury she'd learned to walk around so smoothly it barely registered as a limp. My mother broke her hip when I was 19. She walked exactly like that for the rest of her life. I didn't say that to Dmitri. I don't think I could have gotten the sentence out. I asked him to send me the clip, thanked him, and left the office in a state I can only describe as suspended. Like I was watching myself from a few feet outside my own body, walking back to my apartment, sitting down on my couch, and staring at nothing for the better part of an hour. I told myself there were explanations, coincidences. My mother wasn't the only woman in New York who'd ever broken a hip. Grief plays tricks on pattern recognition. You see your dead mother in strangers on the subway, in the back of someone's head at a coffee shop, for years after they're gone. I knew that. I'd lived that. This was probably just my brain doing what brains do. But I couldn't stop thinking about the flowers. Because a stranger doesn't happen to buy the exact combination, white ranunculus, one stem of purple stalk, baby's breath, brown twine, no ribbon, that one specific dead woman bought for over 20 years from one specific flower stand that, as far as I knew, wasn't even a chain. It was a single stall. Run by a man named Hollies, who I hadn't spoken to since my mother's funeral, when he'd sent an arrangement to the service without me even asking. I decided to go talk to Hollies. Steinway Street hadn't changed much. The stand was still there, tucked between a nail salon and a check cashing place, buckets of flowers spilling color onto the sidewalk the way they always had. Hollies was older, grayer, but he recognized me the second I walked up. He always had a memory for faces, said it was half the job. Elena Brooks, he said, like he was tasting the name. Been a long time. I asked him, as plainly as I could manage, if he'd sold a specific combination, ranunculus, stalk, baby's breath, brown twine, to anyone recently. Multiple times a week for months. His face did something complicated. He didn't answer right away. He busied himself trimming a stem that didn't need trimming. Your mother's bouquet, he finally said. Yeah, somebody's been buying that. Every few days, sometimes more. Who? He hesitated in a way that told me he knew exactly who, and was deciding how much he was allowed to tell me. I'm not supposed to say, he said. She asked me not to, but he stopped trimming. He looked at me the way you look at someone you're about to hurt on purpose because you've decided it's kinder than the alternative. Elena, are you sure you want to know? Some things, once you know them, you can't put back. I told him I was sure. I want you to understand, at that point, after 90 days of frozen cameras and phantom footsteps, and a woman on stairwell footage who walked like my dead mother, not knowing had become far more frightening than any truth could possibly be. Hollies sighed, wiped his hands on his apron, and told me something that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own life. The woman who's been buying those flowers, he said, her name's Renata. She's been coming to me for almost 15 years, long before your mother passed. I told him that made no sense. My mother had been buying that exact bouquet herself, every Sunday, for over 20 years until she died. There wasn't room in that timeline for another woman with the same ritual. Hollies' jaw tightened. Elena, I think it's time somebody told you the whole thing, and I think it should have been your mother, and I'm sorry it's me instead. Renata isn't buying the same bouquet as your mother's. He paused. She is * your mother's bouquet. She's the one who taught it to your mother, not the other way around. I remember physically stepping back from the counter, like the sentence had a force to it. He kept going, gently, like he was trying not to knock me over twice. He told me what he knew, which wasn't everything, but was enough to start pulling the thread. That my mother, Marguerite, had a sister. An older sister named Renata, who I had never once heard mentioned in my entire childhood. Not at holidays, not in old photographs, not in any story my mother ever told me about her own upbringing in Louisiana before she came north. Hollies said the two women used to come to the stand together, decades ago, before I was born. Then, at some point he didn't know the full details of, they stopped coming together. My mother kept coming alone. And a few years after that, he wasn't precise on the timeline. Renata started coming back, alone too, buying the same bouquet, on a schedule that seemed almost devotional. They had a falling out, Hollies said. That much I know for sure because your mother told me herself once years ago when she'd had a hard day and needed to say it to somebody. She said she had a sister she couldn't be around anymore, said it wasn't safe. That's the word she used. Safe. I asked him if he had any way to reach Renata. Any address, any number, anything. He didn't. She always paid cash. She never gave a delivery address because she never had anything delivered. She always carried the flowers herself, on foot, the same way every time. But, he said, she did mention once, a while back, that she lived close by, close enough to walk flowers somewhere without them wilting. Close enough to walk. In this neighborhood, on foot, without flowers wilting, meant somewhere within maybe 10, 15 minutes. My apartment building was 11 minutes from that stand. I'd walked it myself 100 times. I left Holly's stand that day with a single, overwhelming, impossible question sitting in my chest like a stone that had finally found its shape. If my mother had a sister nobody ever told me about, a sister so dangerous my mother used the word *safe to describe staying away from her. Why was that sister now, 6 years after my mother's death, walking to my building every few days and leaving her signature flowers outside my door? Was it a message, a warning, an apology aimed at a woman who could no longer receive it, redirected instead at the daughter left behind? Or was it something else? Something I hadn't let myself consider yet, because it was too strange, too destabilizing to hold in my mind next to everything else I thought I knew. I went home that night, and for the first time in 90 days, I didn't look at the fresh bouquet on my counter with grief. I looked at it like evidence. I want to back up here and tell you something I should have mentioned earlier, because it matters more than I understood at the time. When I moved into this building 2 years ago, my leasing agent mentioned, almost as an aside, that the building had a strange quirk left over from an old renovation decades back. Apartment 4C, mine, and Apartment 3C, directly below it, had at some point been converted from what used to be a single larger unit, split into 2 smaller ones with nearly identical layouts. Same footprint, same window placement, same fire escape access, just stacked instead of side by side. It was a piece of building trivia. I never thought about it again. Until the night I got home from Holly's stand, and out of some instinct I still can't fully explain, I went down to the 3rd floor instead of up to my own. I stood in front of Apartment 3C. There was a name plate on the door, old, slightly tarnished brass, the kind that comes standard from a hardware store, not custom. It read, MDLACROAX. Delacroix, my mother's maiden name, before she married my father and took his surname, Brooks. A name I only knew because I'd seen it once on an old immigration document tucked in a box of her things after she died. A name she never used, never mentioned. A name that belonged, as far as I understood, entirely to a version of her life that existed before me. My hands were shaking when I knocked. Nobody answered. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I swear to you, I could smell it before I could hear anything. The unmistakable, specific perfume of white ranunculus and purple stalk, fresh, recently cut, sitting somewhere just inside that door. I called the management office again the next morning, first thing, before work. I asked who currently held the lease on 3C under normal circumstances. They wouldn't have told me, tenant privacy and all that. But I explained enough of the situation, and the woman I'd spoken to before, the one who'd shown me kindness with the stairwell footage, pulled the file and went quiet on the phone for a long moment. Ms. Brooks, she said slowly, that unit's leaseholder is listed as Marguerite Delacroix. Lease has been continuously renewed for the last 11 years, paid in full every year by check. 11 years. My mother had officially died 6 years ago, which meant that for 5 years, 5 entire years, before her death, a woman using her maiden name had been quietly leasing an apartment directly beneath mine, in a building I would not move into for years after that lease began, in a coincidence so precise it stopped being a coincidence the moment I said it out loud to myself. Except it wasn't a coincidence. Nothing in this story was a coincidence. I understand that now. But at the time, standing in my kitchen holding my phone, staring at that fresh bouquet on the counter, I only understood one thing clearly. Somebody had been paying rent, under my mother's maiden name, on an apartment directly below the one I would eventually move into, years before I ever chose this building, years before I even knew it existed. I don't believe in fate. I believe now in something colder and more deliberate than fate. I believe someone had been watching where I landed for a very long time. I asked the management company, formally, in writing, to let me into 3C, citing safety concerns and the ongoing camera tampering. They said they'd need to reach the leaseholder first, standard procedure, but that given the unusual circumstances, a paid lease with no verified contact in years, and now a documented pattern of unexplained access to the building, they'd expedite a wellness check with building security present. It took 4 days, 4 more mornings, 4 more bouquets. I stopped touching them. I let them pile up on my counter, unopened water, wilting slowly, because some part of me had started to feel that touching them meant accepting something I wasn't ready to accept. On the 5th day, Dmitri and a building security officer met me outside 3C with a master key. The apartment was small, sparse, and unmistakably lived in, but lived in the way a person lives when they're trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. A single bed, neatly made, a small kitchen table with 1 chair, and on that table, weighed down by a smooth river stone, an envelope. It had my name on it, Elena. Not occupant, not to whoever finds this. My name, in handwriting I recognized instantly and completely, because I had spent 33 years learning the specific slant of my mother's cursive on birthday cards and grocery lists and the backs of photographs. My mother's handwriting, on a letter in an apartment leased under her maiden name 5 years before she supposedly died. I sat down in the single chair at that table, in an apartment that had apparently been paid for and maintained for over a decade, and I opened the letter. I'm going to read it to you close to how it was written, because I think you deserve to hear it the way I did. My dearest Elena, asterisk. If you are reading this, then Renata finally did what I asked her to do, which means I am gone, and you have found your way here regardless of how carefully I tried to keep you from having to. My name was not always Marguerite Brooks. I was born Marguerite Delacroix in a small town outside Baton Rouge, and before you were born, I lived a life I have spent your entire lifetime trying to make sure never touched you. I will not put all of it in this letter, because some of it isn't only my story to tell, and some of it involves people who are dangerous in ways I never wanted you to understand firsthand. What I will tell you is this: I did not leave that life because I stopped loving the people in it. I left because staying would have meant you growing up inside it too, and I could not let that happen to you. Renata is my sister, your aunt. She helped me disappear when you were still small enough not to remember any of it. A new name, a new city, a story about a father who left, which was, in its own strange way, truer than you know, because the man I left was not the man I told you about. Renata stayed behind to manage what I left, to keep certain people from ever finding either of us, and she has paid a price for that loyalty I can never fully repay. I kept this apartment as a way back, Elena, not for me to return to the life I left, but as a place close enough to watch over you without ever letting that watching become your burden. I told myself, for years, that I would tell you everything eventually, when you were old enough, settled enough, safe enough. I ran out of time to decide when that would be. The flowers were never a message to frighten you. They were the only language Renata and I ever had that felt safe to speak in, a way of saying, without saying, that you were loved, that you were watched over, that whatever silence surrounded your childhood was chosen out of love, and not the absence of it. I asked her, if anything ever happened to me, to keep bringing them to wherever you were living, for as long as she safely could, until you were ready to ask the questions that would lead you here. I am sorry for the silence, Elena. I am not sorry for the choice. All my love, always asterisk. Your mother. Renata found me before I found her. 2 days after I read that letter, there was a knock at my actual apartment door, not a bouquet on the floor, an actual knock in daylight at 7 in the evening. She was smaller than she'd looked on the stairwell footage, older, with my mother's exact eyes set into an unfamiliar face, which is one of the strangest sensations I've ever had, recognizing a stranger instantly and completely through a feature borrowed from someone else. I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same brand of ranunculus sitting between us in the jar I still hadn't emptied, and she told me the rest of what the letter couldn't hold. She told me about the life my mother left behind, not every detail. Some of it she said she'd take to her own grave the way my mother had taken most of it to hers, but enough. Enough for me to understand that my mother's decision to vanish, to rename herself, to raise me inside a silence I'd never once questioned, hadn't been about hiding a shameful secret from me. It had been about protecting me from something real. Renata told me she'd kept the lease on 3C for 11 years, first at my mother's request, later out of her own grief and her own sense of unfinished duty, because leaving flowers at my door, even after my mother was gone, even after I moved into a building neither of them had chosen for me, but that Renata had quietly, carefully steered a leasing agent toward years earlier, when I was apartment hunting and mentioned Astoria in passing to someone who apparently mentioned it to someone else. Was the only way she knew how to keep a promise to a sister she'd loved enough to disappear alongside, in her own way, for over a decade. I wasn't ready to be found yet, Renata said. There were still people I needed to make sure had stopped looking. I'm telling you that so you understand the silence wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic. How much can I give her versus how much can I risk? I asked her if it was over now. If whatever it was, whatever danger had shaped my entire childhood without my ever knowing it existed, was finally, actually behind us. She said as far as she could tell, yes. Enough time had passed. Enough people involved in that old life had moved on, aged out, lost interest, or passed away themselves. She said she'd been watching, carefully, patiently, for the exact right moment to knock instead of leave flowers and vanish. The camera's freezing, it turned out, wasn't some elaborate technical sabotage. It was a small, cheap signal jammer, the kind sold for reasons far more mundane than my imagination had conjured. Something she'd used out of old habit more than necessity. A leftover reflex from a life that had trained her never to be seen on a recording, even when the danger that taught her that lesson no longer applied. I'm not going to tell you this story ends with fireworks. It doesn't. There's no courtroom, no confrontation with a shadowy villain, no dramatic unmasking beyond the one that already happened, quietly, in a letter on a small table under a river stone. What it ends with is smaller, and I think, more honest than that. Renata gave up the lease on 3C 2 months later. Not because she had to, because she said she finally felt like she didn't need to anymore. I asked her, half joking, half not, if she was going to keep leaving flowers. She said only if I wanted her to. I told her I did. Not every morning, not as a secret anymore. Just sometimes on Sundays, the same day my mother always bought them, the way you keep a ritual alive not because you have to, but because it means something to keep choosing it. We go to Holly's stand together now, once a month or so. She still favors her left side going downstairs. I've started noticing all the small physical inheritances I never got to trace back to their source before. The hip favor, the specific way she laughs with her hand half covering her mouth. The same as my mother's, the same, I have to assume, as whatever woman taught it to both of them. A grandmother I'll probably never get the full story on, in a small town outside Baton Rouge, in a life that started long before mine and shaped it more than I ever knew while it was happening. I don't know everything my mother ran from. I've made peace with the fact that I might never know all of it, that some parts of that old life are staying buried on purpose, by people who are trying to protect me the exact same way my mother spent her whole life trying to protect me, through selective, deliberate silence. Chosen out of love, rather than deception. What I do know is this. For 90 mornings, I thought I was being haunted. I installed cameras to catch a ghost. What I caught, in the end, wasn't a ghost at all. It was the last, quiet act of a woman who spent her whole life making sure her daughter never had to be afraid, and who found a way, even after death, to keep one promise she couldn't keep any other way. I still buy the same bouquet every Sunday, white ranunculus, one stem of purple stalk, baby's breath, brown twine, never ribbon. Some inheritances aren't money or property or a name on a lease. Some of them are just the specific way somebody loved you, quietly, for longer than you ever knew.